This is Sam Long.
I'm John Nugent.
And I am Ron Peters.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. From time to time, listeners will ask us what Bibles we use and recommend and all those sorts of things, which is a very loaded question on many fronts, especially because there's so many options out there. But we thought, and we've mentioned this a couple times, that we kind of have a Bible that's required for students here. Currently, the Bible is the SBL Study Bible. Before, it was the HarperCollins Study Bible or the NIV Faith Life Illustrated Study Bible.
Right,
It was a lot of words.
Right, yep.
So we've been, SBL Study Bible came out, 2 years ago?
A couple years ago, yeah.
And so we've been using it both here on the podcast, but also in our classes. We thought we'd just give you a little review of it. If you're looking for maybe a study Bible, that might be the one for you.
And this is just our opener conversation.
Yeah, this is not the whole
what
episode.
the episode's going to be about. We just thought, we always like to start with something, kind of get our lips moving and get used to talking, vocal cords moving.
This is our warm-up session.
Yeah.
So we're all going to briefly say, hey, what's our experience of it? So you want to go first, Ron?
That's fine. I know that's fine. So it's the updated NRSV, New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. So it's the UE edition.
UE.
There are a few passages I usually go to because they're very significant, looking at how they choose to translate them. I think it's still a really solid translation. I think we've illustrated this over time that there is no such thing as a perfect translation, and there's always going to be a little bit of an argument here or there. Sometimes we just like certain choices better than others, but I still think the NRSV on the whole is a solid translation. I think the UE it just brings it a little bit more, up to date. Language changes all the time, and so I think the updated edition does a good job of trying to get it current here in the early 2000s, 2026. So I think the translation is still pretty solid. Again, not perfect. If you want to, do better, learn Greek and Hebrew and get into the original languages. But I like the translation so far.
Yeah, I'm almost done reading through the whole thing with all the introductions and then sampling heavy from the commentary section underneath. And I think the new translation is smooth. To me, it just reads smoothly.
Yeah.
So however they wordsmithed it, I feel like it reads well in continuity with the NRSV pre-updated edition. But I found some fresh translations of passages that made me stop and go back and then look it up and open up the Greek or the Hebrew and just say, oh yeah, that's kind of cool what they did there.
Yeah.
I found it seems like they have a preference when there's a Greek tradition that is at variance with the Hebrew tradition. They really like the Greek.
Yeah.
They work that in as much as they can. That seemed to be a bias. They certainly didn't do that in all the cases.
Right.
But where there are differences, it seems like they side with the Greek, and I'm sure they have their reasons in those particular passages why they do that. But the most frustrating thing about this, I found the introductions to be just okay.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed the HarperCollins Study Bible's introductions. They said the kind of things that I was curious about, and I felt like they updated you on the latest in scholarship. I don't feel like these introductions are nearly as informative. They're just saying things that everyone knows this. You took up almost a page of a study Bible just telling me Captain Obvious things about the place of this book in the canon. Yeah. It wasn't revelatory. It's just they had this form, everyone had to do this, and they spent way too much time doing things that didn't pay off.
But do you think that's a matter of where we are in our knowledge of the Bible? To somebody who needs a study Bible, especially we think of students who we recommend this Bible to, would that be more revelatory to them as they're dipping their feet in, or do you just think, no, this is just not as strong as it could be?
The less you know, the more you're going to learn from them, for sure.
Yeah. But
HarperCollins just had a way of bringing things freshly. I feel like the level of scholarship in the introductions has gone down.
Okay.
I know. But an exception, as I was thinking about this last week and I was reading the introduction to Judges, I'm like, that one was actually phenomenal.
Yeah.
So some of them are great. They're different authors do different books. But overall, I found them meh.
Mm-hmm. I think part of the problem was I think the HarperCollins Study Bible, when it came out, was pretty leading edge. A lot of the study Bibles that were around that time were not great either. And so I think you were spoiled with a very good study Bible that HarperCollins was, and now this is like, it's fine, but it's not, that's the level. I don't know if that has anything to do with it.
And
or
I
not.
thought, calling it the SBL,
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it would level up the scholar thing. And I just thought there were other agendas going on here. Like they have this Bible Odyssey website at SBL that
that's
has
right.
popular level articles, and they're just like weaving those into the book. And there's no map section.
I hate that. To me, that's the worst thing. No maps. How can you have a study Bible without maps?
I'm
Drives
almost
me
giving
crazy.
up on this on account of the maps.
It's true. I love maps and require maps in my classes, so not having them is pretty lame.
Well, no, I was just going to say, one of the things that keeps us coming back to it is the inclusion of the Apocrypha, which is really nice, even though it's, outside of the Protestant canon. It's great to be able to direct students to those readings. And we certainly go into it in some of my classes. So having that in there is really, really useful. But is that enough to, tip it in favor of, some of the shortcomings that we've been noting here?
So I'm going to say I don't. So I agree that the translation is smooth. I just don't think it's as good as it should be. There are choices that they've made. We've noticed that in here.
Yeah, we have.
Where there are a couple times where Ron has had his Greek combo. I don't know if that's the old NRSV. Out,
Oh, yeah, right,
And then we
yeah.
have ours, and it's like it's different, and I don't think it's an upgrade.
Right.
And this goes back to translational biases and things where we would say, yeah, you're trying to say something that I don't know if I'd agree with. I'm not saying it's all over the place. I don't want to give people the impression that the NRSV is like totally wrong or something.
Right.
But I just know from our podcast, we'd go in and we'd like dig deep and like, yeah, that was a weird choice and one that I don't know that they should have made. And so I don't know. It frustrates me. And I too have a couple passages I go to, and I don't think it meets the standard I was hoping.
Yeah.
But it's fine. It's maybe that was the best there is, but
and the pop-up window conversations, they don't go in a more academic direction. They usually go in a more cultural relevancy direction. How does this relate to current conversations about LGBTQ? Like, that kind of thing is there a lot. And when it's like, man, this would be a great place for a map describing the 5 different territories that we've never heard of before.
yeah.
Now, a lot of times the notes in the bottom make up for that, and I found that helpful. So I find the notes below the text are actually better than the introductions, and definitely better than the pop-up windows. Those are just a waste of space.
I think the notes are basically the same as the HarperCollins.
Maybe that's why I like
They're
it.
they're very
changed
similar.
them, yeah.
I've noticed.
Okay, yeah.
I'm just saying.
All right. Well, anyway, that's our. All right, we're our lips are.
That's right.
We're warmed up.
Muscles are loosened up here. We can speak.
Get back to our series. We're still talking about how Christians might relate to the governing authorities. And we've just kind of wrapped up a series of episodes where we've talked about what the Bible says about the governing authorities, like who they are, how they plug into the powers and principalities, how God uses the nations of this world as a kind of balance of powers to keep each other in check, and how that creates space, enough peace and enough order in the world that God can accomplish his saving purposes through Jesus Christ, mediated through his set-apart people. And so we've just spent a lot of time in that. And last week we talked about the kind of things God holds those powers accountable to and the kind of things he doesn't. And so now we're going to kind of pivot where we've kind of, in the conversation of how do we relate to the governing authorities, up to this point, we've really focused on who are the governing authorities, what role do they play? And hopefully you learned a lot about that, because the Bible's account of the powers and principalities is quite different than what most Christians think and a lot more nuanced. But it's not enough to look at what the government authorities are like and how God uses them. You can't just deduce from that, okay, then what should we do? Right? You have to also have an equally rich account of, and in a world where God uses the powers and principalities in these ways, what is the specific thing he calls his set-apart people to do?
Yeah.
So how we relate to them is partly who are they and what is their role in the world, and it's also part who are we and what is our role in the world. So now we're going to pivot about the role of God's set-apart people, especially in relation to the nations, like not just all the things the church should be doing, but the kind of things the church should be doing that would interface with the world and its politics.
Yeah, and I think it's To your point, John, I think you make a good point there, because you can't just look at the nations and go, well, God's kingdom is just the opposite. Like everything's just opposite day. And so whatever they're doing, we don't do that, or vice versa. But I think God's given us a very rich vision of what he's looking for from his people, to outline their, our function in the world, and how we are, a reflection of his plan, for the world and for humanity. And so, yeah, I think it's very important we understand that positive message where God says, this is what I'm looking for, and this is how you can align yourself with my vision for my people.
In order to do that, we kind of have to tell the story of God's people. And so we're going to try to do that quickly today, in the next 30 minutes, give or take. But specifically drawing attention to when God called the people, what they called them to do. And what did that look like, and what are some things that were expected of them? And, of course, we start in the beginning with Abraham, which is not the beginning, but basically the beginning of the Bible story.
The beginning of God's set apart people.
Correct.
Yeah.
Where God calls Abraham and his wife and calls them apart. And so it begins with Terah and family leaving Ur, the Chaldeans, which is Babylon, and they're headed towards Canaan, but Terah stops in Haran, which is what we might call Syria. It's just north of Canaan. And that, it's at that point that God then continues it. And chapter 12, verse 1 says this: Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so right from the beginning, God is calling out Abraham from his people, from his place, from his things, to a different land, a land that he probably did not know very well, and he's putting him in this place. And so the key here is he's set apart, right?
Yeah.
He's going to be different. He is a Babylonian coming into a Canaanite world.
Yeah.
And it is in this place that God is going to position him and his descendants to fulfill the plan.
Yeah, and what really jumped out to me in that is that very specific message of calling him out. It's not like God saying, you know what, these Babylonians, I can fix this. I can redeem this. I can get them on the right track. No, he pretty much sees it as a lost cause. And as we've talked about many times over the course of these last few weeks, it's not that God can't use the nations to his purposes, but in order to fulfill God's ultimate purpose for humanity, he can't do that with Babylon. Babylon is part of the problem, and he can't redeem that. So he says to Abram, come out. And that coming out, that turning your back on that previous life that you had to embrace what God is now offering you, that is such a key theme that we see throughout Scripture. It's part of that idea of repentance. Abram, you got to turn your back on the old way, and you've got to now follow me. And that means coming out from that old way, really just like severing your connection with it. And so there's just a richness to that image that I think is so important for understanding what it means to be God's people.
Yeah, and that richness is underscored by the fact that the land they're leaving behind is Babel. I mean, it's the land of Babel, where a nation tried to make a great name for itself, a people, by uniting, and God's like, no, that's not my plan for the world. I'm a scattering kind of God, diffuse them, spread them out, diversify them. Babylon is the land where people refuse that intentions. And that's not a commentary on ancient Babel as much as a commentary on Babylon, the Babylons of the world, the great empires that want to make a name for themselves, want to be a great empire, want a centralized kingdom with a strong hierarchical setup that at the top of which is a human king, right, who has control of all the land, and they speak one language, and there's a uniformity of culture. Like, it's that project that God is pulling his people out of. And, that's a very intentional choice.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have, his judgment on Babylon could have been to raise up Abraham to overthrow the leaders and use the great Babylonian resources and strategic geography and all the stuff that makes nations and kingdoms thrive there, like to use those resources to accomplish his kingdom purposes.
Yep.
But God, the fact that God leaves the land of the most likely to succeed, because they really were, that part of the Fertile Crescent is just where great empires flourished and grew and became a center. Whatever God wants to do through his people, he doesn't want to do it there, and he definitely doesn't want to do it that way.
Yep.
He pulls them to the land of Canaan, which is the land of the perpetual underdog. There's just not enough natural resources, rainfall, whatever, to have a stable, strong population. And so famines hit the land on a regular basis, and they have to go to Egypt or elsewhere. Like, great cities don't thrive there because they can't survive off of the natural resources. And so it's this land of the least likely to succeed. And so there's a little bit of judgment on the Babel project and the kind of nationhood that Babel represents.
Yeah, Babel stands as a type of what God doesn't want. And so he uses that to say, no, we're not going to fix this from the inside out, but from the outside in. Right? I'm going to bring you outside it, and then ideally we spread back into it, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to raise you up, and you're going to become, the king. Like you said, either overthrow or we're going to integrate you into the population and into the system, and then you're going to,
Fix
change all the laws, and if we just get the right president in. Oh wait, sorry. And so it's just unexpected. It's not what we do. It's pulling him out so that things can change from the outside inwardly.
Yeah, and it's a building from scratch. I'm going to start with you, Abraham, and your family is the family I'm going to work with and your descendants. Like, I can't redeem Babylon. It's not that God is, he doesn't have power or anything like that, but he's like, this is so far gone, it would take a flood-like thing to start out from scratch. Can't do it with Egypt, same kind of problems there. But if I can start building it from scratch and build it based on my vision, with my instructions, with the people that I have chosen, then this is a kingdom that God himself has raised up. And that's another important point to keep in mind here. It's that God has built this. It makes me think, is it Psalm 100, where the psalmist says, we didn't make ourselves a nation, God made us a nation. And there's that recognition. We played no part in this. We just followed. We were the sidekick. But God is the one who made us the nation.
Yeah. So at the key point of their founding, there was already a question, how should God's people relate to the big nation authorities of the day? And the answer is, come out from them.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to do something different with you somewhere that's totally unlike these places. And that's where he takes Abraham. And there's like a retelling of this, but from the perspective not just of Abraham and Sarah, but from the whole of the Israelites. Because Abraham, he moves in faithfulness from the land of Babylon toward the promised land. And a big famine hits the land, of course, which and there's back and forth. But eventually the whole people end up in Egypt, and they multiply like crazy, which leads to the next big founding passage.
Yeah, and so we find this in Exodus chapter 19. The Israelites have been delivered by God from Egypt, the plagues and everything that we saw there. So they come out to the place God directs them, Mount Sinai. Exodus 19, beginning of verse 4, God says, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the Israelites." And this is God speaking to Moses, who relates that to Israel. And so for God, he's saying to Israel, not only did I call you out from them, not only am I the one who's going to build you, but you're going to be my treasured possession. And for Israel to have that unique identity is really key to understanding their relationship to God. And so I think that even in the New Testament time period, they just understood themselves as having this very unique relationship with the creator of heaven and earth.
Yeah. And we noticed the same pattern. Like, Egypt was the other great world power, the other great way of being a nation and a kingdom in the world. And they were different, I think, from Babylon. Babylon seemed to be more imperialistic, more spreading. I don't know. Egypt kind of had a great thing going on there in Northeast Africa. And they would venture into Canaan a little bit. And so it's not like they were totally satisfied just with what they had. But I suspect that spreading north is more about a buffer zone to protect the mainland from the Babylons from coming in.
The
Right?
Hittites and all that.
I don't think they really wanted the land of Canaan because it was such an amazing place.
No.
It was a military buffer because they had their happy place. Yeah. So there was another empire with a different kind of philosophy. And God had another chance to, all the miracles that delivered them from Egypt could have also been used just to take over Egypt.
Yeah.
bring Pharaoh to his knees, put Moses on the throne,
Right. Yeah.
and now let's do things God's way. And again, God's choice is, no, that's not the shape of my mission.
Yep.
This is such obvious points, but it's hugely relevant to our conversation, because
Yeah.
the very conversation about how we relate to the government authorities is often, how much should we get involved in influencing, shaping, taking over, whether through legislation or through politician placement, take over the world empire where we live, as a strategy where at the key points in the formation of God's people, he is separating them from those nations to become. And what's really great about this passage, I mean, the Abraham calling was, through you, I'm going to bless all the families of the earth, which itself is kind of interesting, because that's not what nations want to do.
Typically.
They want to become a great nation in the earth that all the families look up to,
Yeah.
and pay homage to and pay money to, right? But there's something about Abraham's descendants where it's going to be for the nations, not the great nation, but like there's something about all nations of the earth that is their interest. So anyway, the Egypt project is, it's, again, we have to leave that project. We have to do something radically different. And we're going to, again, do that back in Canaan, the land of the perpetual underdog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think your point about the place that could have been used, they could have just taken over Egypt, and they didn't. I think it was, ignore that. We assume, it was for their salvation, to bring them out of slavery. Like, yes, and they were poised. Then they had the people, and they had the ability to just take over and to be the new Egypt. And God says, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point, where God is moving them towards something different, a kingdom of priests and holy nation, which they can't be if they're basically Egypt 2.0, or at this point 3.0. That's fine.
Which version of Egypt?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in our day, Egypt is a symbol of liberation.
Yeah.
Like, that story is so key. You down with the powers who oppress and enslave. That's what God is about, and that's what his people should be about, leaving behind the oppressors.
Yeah.
But there's a necessary component to that. For the Israelites, and this is what Ron read about, this priestly nation, this holy people set apart to God, his treasure possession. It's liberation from slavery and oppression to covenant commitment to Israel's God.
Yeah. Right.
And what you're liberated to is just as important, if not more so, than what you're being liberated from.
Yeah.
And what they're liberated to is a set-apart people in a covenant commitment to God, where they are keeping his commandments.
Mm-hmm.
And so Egypt cannot be reduced to just a liberation from. It's a re-enslavement to a different master. Mm-hmm. Only a master whose best interests are not just for his own people and his own well-being, but for the good of the whole world.
Right. Well, I was just saying, I love that priestly image, because in the ancient world, priests were the go-betweens between the deity and the people, whether it was in Israel or in other pagan nations. And understanding that is so important for understanding our role as the people of God, whether it's Israel or to this very day, that God is using us to that purpose. And he still wants to use us as priests, that our job is to act as that mediator. But we're inviting people, come be priests with us. It's not even, hey, we're your priests and we're gonna kind of keep that going. It's like, you get to be a priest as well. That's what we see in like 1 Peter, where he uses this exact same language, and he's writing to Gentiles. Like, oh my gosh, we've been grafted into the vine, that is Israel, and we get to be that part of that nation of priests. And it's an exciting thing to think about. That is our function. And this is something that I just don't want people to go, oh, that's a great Old Testament story. It's like, no, the New Testament keeps coming back to this.
Yeah.
Read 1 Peter in light of this, and you're going to see that Peter really sees that we're a part of that same project.
Yeah. And priests don't exist for themselves. They exist for the people that they serve. And when it comes to the Israelite, as a nation, they exist in service to all the nations. Right. But it's not clear yet what that's going to look like. And so we get a sense of that in Deuteronomy. So that's going to be the next passage we go to. What is the means by which God is going to use his set-apart people, Israel, to be a blessing to all nations? Torah is just like a central part of it. There's something about the commands, the way of life that God gives them is key. And so I'll be reading from Deuteronomy 4, verses 5 to 8. See, just as the Lord my God has charged me. I now teach the statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. You must observe them and perform them, for this will show your wisdom and discernment to the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this is a great nation, a wise and discerning people. For what other great nation has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is whenever we call to him? And what other great nation has statutes and ordinances as just as this entire law that I am setting before you today?
So I actually wish this passage were in Leviticus.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Because people act like Leviticus is a bunch of weird, arcane things that mean nothing, when it's the exact opposite. It's exactly doing what this is trying to accomplish, which is like everything you do, what you eat, what you wear, how you interact in certain ways. It's showing all the nations that you're different and you're set apart for certain reasons. And they're gonna be like, oh, that's pretty smart. Didn't realize that was what you could do. But here in Deuteronomy, it's fine. And
It'll do.
Yeah, the second no.
and it just sums up like exactly what Torah was intended to accomplish. Not, it's not about salvation. It's not about, making sure God's not ticked off with you. It's saying we're creating a people that are just going to be different, and it's going to encompass every aspect of your life, and from, like I said, from what you eat to even how you rule yourselves, which is of course pertinent to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I think a key phrase here in this passage is that the laws are going to stand out to the peoples and the nations because of how just they are.
Yeah.
And justice language isn't necessarily language that describes how religious they are,
Right.
how spiritual they are, how in tune with the Creator they are. That's a part of it. But what the nations are going to see is justice. They're going to see a politics and economics, an approach to law and a political organization in life, and they're going to say, wow, that's a justice. That is like peace for the people. That is wholeness for the community. That is fairness when it comes to money, when it comes to laws, when it comes to violation of community standards. There won't be double standards. And this Torah is shaping them to become a people who is visible to the nations as a distinct people.
Yep.
Like, they don't look at Israel and think, this is a subgroup of us that we really admire. This is its own social political entity. And the justice that I see in them that comes from their God is something that I truly admire and wish I had more of in my land.
Yeah. It makes me think of what we see, in the Gospels, like, that the gospel is good news for the poor, because this justice that is proclaimed isn't really good news for the people who are in powerful positions, because they build their power on their elite status among the people over whom they rule. And so those people who are in those elite positions of power and wealth and all that, justice means turning your back on that, being more concerned with the people. You're willing to, be generous and give and not be expected to be paid back. And so for those people, it's going to be like, well, this isn't all that great. But for the majority of people who are just trying to get by in their daily lives, they're like, man, I'd love to live in Israel. This would be a great place to live.
Yeah.
And so it's that invitation to the world to say, there's a better way. And, these people who are in powerful positions are not proclaiming this better way to you. I also like the part where it's God, again, who is giving them instructions. Like, they're not getting those instructions from their gods. The Egyptian gods are not telling them how to live. They're not giving them like detailed instructions about how to form a community in which people can enjoy the justice that God is proclaiming to them. This is another way that Israel is so radically different, that God has taken the time to say, I'm going to give you instructions, and these instructions are going to make you into a great people. Not great like the world thinks of, but it's going to make you great. And that should be another testimony. It's like, what other nation has gods who do this kind of stuff? Our God is so much better, and we have such a better relationship with him.
Yeah. And the presupposition of all of it is holiness. It's
Yes.
separation. If you're not separate from the nations, they can't see that you have a different way of doing things.
Yeah.
If they just see you as there are different kinds of Christians, and we have Christians, or we have Republicans who happen to be Christian, and we have Democrats who happen to be Christian. And like, if they just see us as being a subset of themselves, it's hard for them to see a set apart way of life. If they're just seeing Christians who have identified with this branch of their own politics or with that branch of their own politics, that's a fundamentally different vision than what's going on here in Torah.
Right. Yeah. We talk about Christians, talk about like, what's your witness, or like, what are you portraying? And this was their witness. They were set apart. They were holy. They were different. And if they were not able to live out the kind of life and make the kind of difference that God wanted them to, which is exactly what happened. But that's that's the end of the story.
Yeah. So we wanted to highlight just a few aspects of the politics of ancient Israel according to Torah. Like, what is the governing structure that God gave them, and how does that stand in relationship to the governing structure of the nation? So I know we have like 5 areas to talk about, but one of them is they have a fundamentally different approach to rulers. In the ancient Near East, the rulers there's a king, right? And he is the head of the area, and all the governing authorities are underneath him in a kind of clearly defined hierarchy. And he lives in a capital city, which is the center of the kingdom, and wealth concentrates there, and all the great and interesting things happen there, and the political advantage happens there, and the people who live there are often the people who are closest to the king, friends of the king, or warriors or servants of the king. It's a very king-centered capital. And that king often claims to have a special relationship with deity, a God who endorses them and gives them that power. But there's a centralized power in a centralized city under a centralized ruler. They have all power. And, sometimes people thrive. Certain people thrive in that.
Right.
And most people don't. But Israel is widely different when it comes to rulership. You want to give a stab at that, Sam?
Sure. Well, I would also, to your point, I think I just want to reiterate that they did see themselves as their power was validated because the God chose them. Because they said that special relationship was not just like, hey, he's my buddy, but like, no, God put me here, whatever that God is. And so I even think of like the Code of Hammurabi, which we go to with like, oh, it's an ancient law code. It's similar to the Israelite code. All that's true. But in the preamble, the point is, Shamash made me king. So you listen to me, and what I'm about to say is not just from me, it's from God, right? And so that's an important part where they're showing that their power comes from someplace beyond themselves. A lot of it is made up. That's okay.
Propaganda.
Propaganda. Thank you. But in Israel, there was a long time where they had no king.
Yeah.
And they were supposed to be a theocracy, which is God was king. And so we see that in the Psalms all the time, where God is called king, and we see that when we come to Samuel, and they said, or in Judges rather, they look around and they say, oh, they want to be like the nations, but they said there was no king in Israel, which implies 2 things. One, it's not just a statement of like they didn't have kings, but it implies that God wasn't either, because God was supposed to be the king, and they went to him, and so because of that, they had a structure, but there was not a king for a long, long time. And so even here in Deuteronomy in chapter 16, it sets up the way it was kind of supposed to be. First of all, you have judges and officials. This is chapter 16, verse 18. In all your towns that the Lord your God is giving you, they shall render just decision for the people. This goes back to what you just said. The point is they're having justice, right, for the people. There's not supposed to be, you're not supposed to distort justice in verse 19. You must not show partiality. You must not accept a bribe, and on it goes. And the point is, there are leaders, but they have one function: to bring justice to the people, to make sure things are rightly ordered. There's no mention of a king here at all. We'll get to that in a second. But here it starts with, there's just people, elders, other ones who have come together, and their whole job is just to make sure Israelite society is a just one. Because if it's not just, how can we do what happened in chapter 4? If our society is just like everyone else's, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer and people manipulate justice, then how the other people are going to look and say, oh, boy, you guys really got something going on? They wouldn't. And so their whole goal is to make sure they're living out Torah, which was bringing justice to the whole nation.
Yeah. A theocracy is their unique standard, because it's not like I mean, in their theocracy, there is no human, who is in charge, and the God channels everything through them.
Right.
God disperses power. He gives Torah to the people and says, you all have to live this way. And among the people, there are a plurality of judges, a plurality of elders, plurality of priests and Levites. There are prophets scattered among the people, and they all share responsibility for keeping this people in line with Torah so that they become, a light to the nations, a just people that can be a blessing to other nations by displaying God's justice and extending God's justice beyond their own circles. And so you would say, in contrast to a king like the nations, a strict hierarchy, there is a plurality of rulers, not just more than one ruler, more than one kind of ruler. You have prophets holding accountable kings, and you have priests holding accountable prophets, right? And vice versa. There's this, and it kind of reminds me of the scattering of Babel. There is a plurality of nations to hold each other accountable, so there's no great mega nation. And there's a plurality of rulers on the ground bearing the responsibility for guiding the people into justice, and they hold each other accountable too. There's no human that kind of wields the trump card and like what they say goes. God is the one who fills that office. And so Torah kind of is given to give people the life that you are to live by. And so what God does is scatters Levites, priests throughout the 12 tribes who can teach that Torah and pass it on to the people and ask people's questions. And if you run into an issue where the people are divided on a topic and they need a word from the Lord, there's no king to make the decision. They actually bring it to the priest, and if the priest can't find the answer in Torah, then it goes to the high priest, and the high priest basically casts lots and discerns from the Lord with the Urim and Thummim, like what is God's answer on this. The high priest is not the decision maker.
Right.
It's just the one whom God has appointed to be the channel for relaying his information so that it's God making decision and no single human.
Yeah. And I think that's just hilarious. Like, we think of the priests were the leaders, but they had one job, which is to teach Torah. Right.
Yeah.
And I guess if something comes to them like, oh, okay, we'll help you with that. But they're not dispensing justice. That's what these other people are for.
Yeah.
And I think it's like you said, like we often hold people in high esteem, but like that wasn't actually what they were supposed to do. The priests weren't ruling things. No one was. Well, God was technically, but yeah.
Yeah, and the priests weren't involved in fighting the battles.
No.
I mean, they were set apart from daily governance. They didn't try the cases. There were judges who did that and elders who did that. Like, the responsibility was just scattered among the people where you just couldn't draw a hierarchy to know who was in charge. It was God and then this plurality of leaders. And God's spokesperson in one moment is a judge, in another context is a prophet, in another context is a priest.
Yeah.
And it's who is listening to God and is a worthy vessel for communicating his will to the people. And so, when we talk about, how do we relate to the governing authorities? The way that question has to be framed is, how do we as a people whom God has shaped to be not like the governing authorities who invest power in an elite people at the top of a hierarchy, but who on the ground spread out responsibility among common ordinary people on the ground whose lives are close to the lives of the people they're serving and living with? How do we as a people who believe that power is best dispersed among a plurality and not vested in the hands of the elite, how do we participate or relate to governing authorities who have built their own hierarchy that has a president at the top? And then balance of powers is, there's some semblance of balance of powers in the different branches of government. But that's as a part of a hierarchy that doesn't exist to serve all nations, but for the good of one particular nation. And they do so in a way that very much resembles kingship like the nations, where the commander, the president, is the commander of the army, the commander-in-chief, and gets to make executive orders and things of that nature.
Yeah. Well, do you want to talk about a king?
Sure, yeah.
Because right after that, after the decisions they can't figure it out and the priests come in, they do talk about a king, but it's very different than one would expect it. He says, you're going to come in, but don't make a king like the nations. But it's the one God chooses. Again, there's that divine sanctioning of the king. It's not by vote, popular vote. It's the one that God gives them.
Right, so I want to clarify something before you unpack that. Like, he doesn't say, I will give you a king. He says, when you get in the land, you're going to want one.
Yes.
Like, I haven't given you one, but you're going to want one. That's a very deliberate way of framing the question. And he's like, all right, I can work with a king. If you're going to really need one and beg me for one, I can work with one, but he's going to have to be totally different than all these other kings.
Yeah, that's right. And again, it's the one he's going to choose, God that is. And he gives all sorts of stipulations. They have to be one from among you, which makes sense. You don't want to. How can you be a distinct people if it's just another person from another nation? So it's one of you, not a foreigner, from your own community. Then he can't be like one of these kings that uses his position and place to become wealthy. Right, go and get a bunch of horses and chariots from Egypt and from other places because one, you're not going back there again, and two, we don't need that kind of king. Mm-hmm. He can't acquire a bunch of wives for himself. He can't acquire a bunch of silver and gold. Right, if he's the king, he's got a job, and that job is going to be laid out here in a second. Is not to become rich, and it is not to become like the other kings of the nations. Right, instead, when he takes the throne, he's supposed to read the law. Right, in the presence of the priest. Now we think, well, that's not his job. That's the priest's job, right? Yes, but also the king's job, where he's better know what he's king over, and it's supposed to remain with him. He's supposed to read it, and he should. Basically, he's without saying it, he becomes kind of like a priest in the sense that he needs to learn the law and he needs to have it down. So if there's ever any doubt, he's like, "Oh, well, let's just go to law, which we all should know, right?" Wink, wink, and we go and we dispense it. And again, but look at what it says here in verse 19. This is worth reading. It shall remain with him, meaning the law. He shall read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, diligently observing all the words of this law and these statutes, neither exalting himself above other members of the community, nor turning aside from the commandment, either to the right or to the left, so that he and his descendants may reign long over the kingdom in Israel. And that's fascinating. That when you think of king, you think he's the top dog, right? Not in Israel.
Yep.
He's not. He's just basically God said, "You want a king? Sure, he's a king, but not like you want. He's gonna be another Joe Schmo who just knows the law."
If you need a symbolic figurehead, someone that someone can talk to, visually to conceptualize your organizational prowess, you can have someone kind of like Moses, right? Who was basically the mediator of Torah to the people. Like, if he's going to share power on loan from on high, it's not going to be a power different than all the other rulers and leaders have. It's going to be Torah. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that he reads it in the presence of the priests.
Yeah.
Because they're the authoritative interpreters of it. And I think their presence in this passage is significant. He can't just make Torah say whatever he wants.
Good point.
Right? Bend Torah to, use Torah the way the kings of the nations use religion, just to back the king's ideas. The priests are there to keep the king in check, to make sure he's not drawing things from Torah that aren't there, or imposing his vision of human thriving onto the people of Israel using Torah as a prop.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's building on that, the temptation is going to be to use those other kings as your model. You're going to look at Egypt or Babylon or the Hittites or maybe even smaller kingdoms, your neighbors like the Ammonites, Moabites, all them, and you're going to look at how they do kingship and say, well, there you go. That's how they do it. I'm just going to do it better. I'm going to do it in a more godly way, but it's still going to look like them. And Torah is designed to challenge that, to undermine that, to say, do not look at them as an example. Only look at them as an example of what God wants to break. Okay? Yep. He does not want you to do it that way. And so if you're reading Torah, and as you rightly said, reading it in conversation with the priests, then the king is going to understand that God has a radically different vision for his people and a radically different vision for kingship. And so your kingship should be very, very different. And I love that passage, not exalting himself over his above the people, because I think that's exactly what we begin to see throughout Israel's history, is that the kings do that. And you're kings like other nations. You're looking at them and you're not really listening to the Torah vision of what God wants for his people.
Yeah. And the priests, as laid out in Torah, the prophets, the elders, the judges, they don't exalt themselves over the people. They are among the people. They serve the people in the specific way God calls them to serve. And if you're going to have a king, he can't be any different. So you're basically, if you're going to introduce the concept of a symbolic figurehead, as long as it's symbolic in function and doesn't turn you into Babel or Egypt, but you remain a Torah-guided people under the theocracy of God's reign, accountable to the priests and the other leaders. If you have a king who's on the same playing field in that way, then he becomes part of the checks and balances, right? And it doesn't undermine the Torah vision of a plurality of leaders if this passage in Deuteronomy 17 is followed. Of course, when they set up the kingship and they ask for one finally, and he gives them one, he warns them, but your king is not going to listen. He's not going to become this Torah king. He's going to exalt himself over the people, and he's going to oppress you, and everything's going to fall to pieces. Torah is going to go by the wayside, and I'm going to have to remove your king and kick you out of the land. And, he doesn't have great dreams for the kingship and its success. Because when you give that kind of power, even symbolically to an individual, that symbolism starts to become reality, and they start functioning like worldly kings.
Yeah,
I think the kings misunderstood their role. Basically, the only thing that the king was supposed to do is become a Torah expert.
right. Yeah.
It doesn't say lead my army. It doesn't say any of that. It says be a Torah expert and then be an example for the people to follow. That seems to be what his role is, and that's not how it often turned out. Is that the king wanted to be like the other kings? We're going to take him out. We're going to fight. We're going to do all these other things, and as a result, they became just like the nations.
Yeah, because when Israel asked for a king, when Samuel's old age, they're like, we want somebody to lead our armies and to fight on our behalf. And Samuel says this is not a good idea, but kind of going what you're saying there, Sam. Once this person has all of that military power at his disposal, it's like, well, what can I do with this? It's like, I've got the power, and so I'm not going to just be sort of a warlord or something like that. I am going to begin to initiate all the things that I think are right, and I'm going to consolidate my reign, which we see happening in David and Solomon and all those guys. And I'm going to centralize the bureaucracy, which we see in David and Solomon. It's like, you can't resist it. There's some human beings that we can't resist. Once we have control over those institutions, we just start looking like everybody else. And it takes such a conscious decision to say, I'm not going to be that guy. And the story of the Old Testament is, man, these guys just couldn't resist. Once they got the power of the military behind them, everything else starts going in the way of the nations.
Yeah. So as we look at Torah and, what kind of governing setup does God give them, the key theme is not like the nations. Not a king like the nations, not an army like the nations. There is no standing army in Torah.
Yeah.
Instead, it's like, when God wants you to go to war, he'll tell a priest, and the priest will blow a trumpet.
Right.
And then all the farmers grab their farming equipment, and and don't worry about how many of you there are, because it's going to be God who fights the battle anyway.
Right.
That's right.
Exactly.
So they don't have an army like the nations. They're not allowed to make alliances with other nations, which is a key way other governing authorities do. They pick what other nations they want to be friends with and what other nations will be enemies, not Israel. None of them are to be friends with Israel. They're not to make alliances. That's part of what these marriages. You're not supposed to take many wives, because those are often marital alliances with other kings. And the last thing I would say before we kind of wrap up is another thing a king does is establish a capital city where the army is stationed, where the religious temple is, so that God can have one concentrated place to be tethered to the king's wishes. But the way God sets up Israel, there is not just a plurality of leaders, but a plurality of tribes. There's 12 territories, and they all have their own judges and priests and elders and local rulers. And that's how things get handled. You don't have one tribe that's making decisions that are going to impact another tribe. Right. All the decisions have been made for you in Torah. Now live it out.
Yep.
If you have questions, and built into this is the assumption that it's best for people, living in central Michigan to be making decisions about the best way to organize life in central Michigan, which is going to be different than southeast Tennessee or in Los Angeles or in New York City. Like, different territories have different needs, and different structures best suit the needs of those specific territories. But with kingship like the nations, the king is the ultimate decision maker. Decisions are going to be made in the capital city. There's going to be a capital tribe, and that tribe is going to be elevated among the other tribes. And then all of a sudden, the locals are not making the decisions. Pharaoh is.
Yeah.
Right? We just have circumcised Pharaoh on the throne doing for Israel what Pharaoh was doing for Egypt.
Right. Yep.
So all this is just, when you study Torah, you see that God is concerned with governing authorities and structures, and he has set apart his people from the nations like Babylon, like Egypt, so they would have a unique politics, a unique economics that's totally unlike the nations, because what is unique about their politics, Torah, no standing army, God fighting battles, God making the judgments, it's the source being God as the authority and the one who wins the battles for you that is central to the purpose God has of creating a people who can be a blessing to all nations. Once you have a standing army, you think you can fight whoever you want. All of a sudden, other nations become enemies and not the people I'm supposed to be a blessing to. So there is a compatibility issue. God resourced Israel for the unique mission that Israel has. And a part of that resourcing is that they have to have a politics totally unlike the nations. So the question is, how do we relate to the governing authorities? Well, at least in our Israelite roots, we think of their politics as fundamentally geared for a different purpose than the politics of the people of God, because they have a different purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up this portion. We have more to talk about because that's not the end of the story by any means.
There is a New Testament.
That's what I've heard. Try to avoid it. But until then, thanks for joining us this episode of the After Class Podcast. After Class because
the best conversations happen
after class.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the After Class Podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Social media pictures and descriptions are provided by Darren Harris. Audio mixing and editing is done by Drew Nyquist. If you've enjoyed this episode of ACP, you might also enjoy GLCC's Master of Arts in Practical Theology degree. In this 36-hour program, you will receive first-rate biblical and theological instruction from John, Ron, Sam, and several of their colleagues at Great Lakes Christian College. To learn more about this program, visit glcc.edu. Get practical and go deep at GLCC.